on that basis, welcome everyone. It's been on the ground, but I think we can still get going. So have we received any apologies for absence?
No.
No apologies for absence. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? No. Can we approve the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting held on 10th of October 2023?
Yeah, one of the things that wasn't included in the minutes, Ashton's spoke about the fact that we need to not only maintain but increase the sponge ground around Whittingham, and because that's such a good. Is it? Sorry. There's a necessary need to increase it. There's a point in there and that's somewhere. So I don't know exactly where, but if you do point that out, it's definitely in the minutes.
Yeah, they are fairly comprehensive, aren't they? It's hard to pinpoint. That is familiar.
It says that discussing the role of Whittingham Ward as a city's equivalent of the flood barrier, and Ashton's advice against complacency. In that the board provided an ecosystem that was slow draining and could adore river water. And it says about, in terms of that being the floodplain, but it doesn't say that he specifically said that needs to increase and be protected and be increased.
What do you mean that we need to have a look through? I can't read the minutes at this stage.
Yeah.
I think it does say that somewhere. I'll point it out. If not, I'll probably raise that.
Thank you.
In this, but if I do find it, I'll let you know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't. There's too much to read through.
No, that's understandable. We'll sort that out. Otherwise,
sorry. Yeah, so it says about the 20 deaths, but I think it perhaps needs to be made a bit clearer that that's 20 deaths per year, and that would likely increase year on year as temperatures continue to rise. That's like 20 deaths by 2050.
yeah,
Which was my understanding of it, but if that's incorrect, that needs to.
Can I just ask them that if you do have queries like this, then we can look and have a look and just check it so it's in,
Yeah, sorry,
because it is quite difficult to do this at that time. But I assumed it was year on year, so I didn't put that in this, I just recalled what's there.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, sorry, I should clarify.
It was all the presentations, not the books. So
thank you.
okay, so we'll get this clarified. In which case, on to the first substantive item, which is an update on the citywide climate action. Papers were circulated on this, so who am I handing over to? Phil, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back. So Ben and I put together a paper. I'll do the first half of it and then we'll talk us through the second half. And really it's just a summary of work that's been underway for the last 12 months. During the last 12 months there's been a lot of research and content written that is currently being evolved into a suite of documents that will send out to the Council's environmental programme. And essentially that will comprise a programme document, a citywide climate action strategy and plan, and the Council's plan for delivering net zero by 2030. Although the content has been written, there's plenty of work already underway, and so a couple of the later paragraphs just give an update on what that work looks like, and this is just a summary. So yeah, paragraph number 1 is that we have been developing specific to SEEP, a citywide climate action strategy and plan to meet the city's 2045 net zero target. And also, as I've just said, as part of that suite of documents, an operational carbon reduction plan for the Council's emissions, including housing, will follow on in due course. The city's actually been doing pretty well with decarbonisation, but we recognise now that there's a significant step change needed to towards the interim targets that are set out by the government for 2035 and the 2045 ultimate net zero target. Essentially, a citywide climate action strategy and plan has been written. It's been consulted upon internally with officers, and we've formally engaged the Climate Commission to assist us as sort of trusted advisors, critical friend type capacity to further evolve the strategy. And we're planning to hold an early public consultation at Norwich Science Festival in February. That's really just to canvass the public's opinion on the sufficiency of the scope and the targets and those kind of more general issues before we go through a final drafting of the strategy and then a full public consultation exercise that will consult on the detail of the strategy and plan. In paragraph 3 there, we just set out a sort of tiny snippet of some of the scope, and really the reason we put that in is to demonstrate the Council's commitment to lead and coordinate a citywide climate action strategy and plan. And as I've just said, a number of potential actions are already underway, and these include the development of heat networks and a local area energy plan, which I'll cover off now and then talk a little bit about the supplementary planning document that is in development for East Norwich. So with regard to low carbon heat networks, Norwich is an interesting city. We've got some pretty difficult buildings to treat. And one that always focuses my mind is the halls. It's very much building locked. It can never be particularly energy efficient because of its heritage nature. So, how might we, as the owner and operator and custodian of that building, decarbonise it? And the solution that's coming to the fore is a pretty significant citywide heat network, the development of citywide heat networks. So throughout the previous 12 months, my team's been working with the Government Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. And we've undertaken a kind of pilot scheme that looks at the feasibility of introducing a new planning regime that encourages the development of heat networks in cities. We're one of 28 cities that have taken part in the pilot. Lots of data has been provided to look at how we use heat in the city, right down to the level of individual buildings. And that has resulted in DENS doing a pretty sophisticated modelling exercise. And the result of that exercise is that 3 heat network zones have been recommended for the city. They include the Norwich Research Park, which already has some, albeit disintegrated, heat networks, the city centre, and the third is centred on the development zone in East Norwich. So they're pretty significant, and there will be new planning legislation. In fact, there already is new planning legislation in the Energy Act of 2023 that sets out requirements for local authorities to actively promote heat network zones. And in essence, what that means is that where a heat network exists, new developments and significant refurbishments will be obliged to connect to those low carbon heat networks. And this is all part of the UK's plan to defossilise, to move away from gas specifically for heating. And at the moment, heat networks provide about a very small percentage of the UK's heating requirements, something like 3 to 6%. And the government's strategy is to increase that to about 20%. So it's a look into the future. The way that will roll out is that, given the confidence that the government seeks to implement heat network zones in Norwich, the council can then facilitate discussions with heat network developers, and it's power to our elbow to move the development of those heat networks forward. on a similar vein, there's been forward movement on a local area energy plan, commonly known as LEAPS. UK Power Networks, who previously had been quite difficult to engage with around strategic citywide planning, have changed their business model and have developed a capacity to engage with all of the cities and local authorities in their geography. We now have an account manager who is able to talk with us, and we've had a number of strategic conversation planning discussions with them. And they've also developed really quite a remarkably good local area modelling facility online tool, which we've got access to. And it means that we now have all of the means to model a number of scenarios for the city to do with decarbonisation. So, for example, as we come out of the use of gas for heating, we can model the city's increased need for electricity for heating, the uptake of electric vehicles, etc. And we're working with the County Council to develop a Norfolk-wide local area energy plan. Almost certainly this will be funded through the County Council's, I think it's their NIF fund. They have a fund set aside for infrastructure development. And so we're currently, through the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership, developing a brief for a county-wide leap. There will be smaller versions of that. There will be a version for Norwich City, the urban area, and there will be a version for East Norwich, etc. So these smaller geographies will join up into a much more significant county-wide local area energy plan. And the last thing that I'll cover before handing over to Ben is that there's been a lot of forward movement with an energy and carbon supplementary planning document for East Norwich. Work with my team using our trusted advisors have drafted an ambitious supplementary planning document. In no gas is the two-word summary, but also lots of other kind of strategic provisions for either very, very efficient buildings. Essentially, the supplementary planning document suggests there are two strategic routes that developers can go down, either passive house style buildings or another strategy which places less emphasis on fabric but greater emphasis on low carbon heat networks. The preference is set out for high performance housing because it reduces energy demand in the city, so there's a greater proportion of energy is available for the citywide decarbonisation programme, and it also reduces the cost of energy to consumers, which improves prosperity more widely in the city. So it's a pretty comprehensive supplementary planning document. It's a little bit early to bring it here, but that has been it's been developed in collaboration with county. There's good agreement on the requirements set out. So in due course, we'll be able to bring a copy of that here. I think they're my paragraphs. Do we want to do questions now?
Yeah. Questions?
That was it.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
So I just wanted a bit of clarity on the heat network development. I asked about this in scrutiny recently, and I think I also emailed Ben about it, and that there's nothing substantive. It's all discussion at the moment. There's no sort of specific funding or further documentation that we can look at. Is that correct?
I think what has been published are the heat network provisions of the Energy Act 2023. So that's in UK law, and that's pretty significant. the work that we've done with the government department has actually produced a map of heat network zones. It's a little bit early to bring it here. The central government are actually quite nervous about this because it's quite a big step into a new area for them. So they're just asking for a little bit of caution. We're socialising it internally with our strategic planning officers and talking to county about how that plays out, because it's not just within the city council's administrative area, it's in the wider urban area. So there's discussions ongoing with our neighbouring local authorities with that. But
ask further questions on that? Is it ground source heating? Is that what it is? I mean, like, just in a naive kind of way.
no, quite. It's energy. It's any low carbon heat source, and it's more likely to be air source. Okay. As you get to kind of community and district scale air source, they typically become more efficient than a domestic air source. They become kind of two-stage air source. So my understanding anecdotally is that a lot of the direction of travel in technology terms is air source.
Okay, that answers that. Can we move on to Lee? No. So with the local area energy plan, Norfolk Climate Change Partnership, So, where is it? So all I was wondering was, because, sorry, I've lost where I was looking at. Here we are. The development of interactive model enable local authorities to model their own scenarios. Have we got models in place?
We have. What we've done as part of the work that we've undertaken for East Norwich is we have got the information to put into a model. So, for example, if you take 1,000 houses and you take them off of gas and you put them either onto air source or ground source and have electric vehicle charging, what difference does that make to the load? And obviously, one house is very different to 1,000 houses because the way energy is consumed by quite a large community is greatly reduced because not everybody's heating runs at the same time in simple terms. So we've developed the means to use the model as part of the East Norwich work that we've done. So that will be built into the brief. So our scenarios are becoming clearer. But essentially, what we're going to do is model a full decarbonisation scenario and what that looks like in 5-year periods. So as X number of thousand houses are taken off of gas and their heating is electrified by means of X% ground source, X% air source, and we develop solar panels, PV on roofs, according to a number of scenarios. What does that do to the city's electricity network? And what does UK Power Networks need to do to ensure that can happen? What's the cost?
Okay. So for instance, BID, the business, what do they stand for? The BID, whatever they bid. They're doing a solar network.
That's right.
Is that incorporated in LEAP? That's part of
that. Will be. So the business community, businesses falls under the broad term of community energy. They're one of the communities of the city. I mean, the work that the BID's done has been really innovative. Been keeping a very close eye on it. So their kind of pico grid concept and their solar roofs concept is very much part of the modelling exercise.
Okay, no, brilliant. Would it be possible to, I'm aware of that project, but it makes me think, because that's not listed there might be multiple projects going on which we could be celebrating or trying to encourage. And are there lots of other innovative projects like that happening, which aren't in the documents?
I mean, there's an awful lot going on, and we could probably talk to you for quite a long time about it. I think you've probably heard of most of it across our various means of communications and forums. So Ben's going to talk about community energy group that's evolving out of the Climate Commission, etc. So I think you've probably got most of it.
Okay, that's being picky. Thank you. I don't know if you got any more.
The only thing, I don't, you might have already said it and I missed it. So the climate action strategy and plan that you've been working on, when is that going to be available?
That's a good question. So it has been circulated amongst officers, but it's really, the question now is how much time will it need to spend with the Climate Commission, and as always, as we're coming up to an election period, it's either falls before or 2.5 months later. I wouldn't mind betting that actually it will come after the election period. But it's written, and with the Climate Commission's input, we'll have something to consult on. And the input from the public consultation at the Science Festival. But we won't be making it available to the public. What we're doing is we'll make a kind of templated engagement form that that sort of requests feedback on some very summarised elements of it.
And if we could just ask one other thing. So, like the things that we're doing, they're in line with sort of the government policy on climate, but I know that when you came to the meeting before and like with Asher Minns and gave us all that information, current policies take us to, I think it was close to somewhere between 2.4 and 3 degrees, which we know is unsafe.
So
In terms of what the Paris Agreement set out, so it goes way beyond the Paris Agreement, safe benchmark. So I just wondered, with the things that we're doing, are we going beyond that? And if not, are we adhering to rules that are failing, I suppose?
No, I totally get what you're saying. So UK strategy and plan, as set out by the government, is aligned to the Paris Agreement, 1.5 to 2 degrees max. And everything that we're doing is aligned to that. In fact, the Council's own climate action strategy for our operations exceeds that. It's even safer, if you like. It's the wider global community's failure to adopt Paris Agreement activity that presents that risk of warming going to 3 degrees, or the likelihood that we're going to 3 degrees. So in terms of mitigation, greenhouse gas reduction, we are totally aligned to the Paris Agreement for the city, and even more stringent than that for council operations. But we're cognizant of the risks that come with the failure of the global community to adhere to the Paris Agreement and the climate-related events and impacts that are, quite frankly, likely to impinge on the city. So our adaptation measures are considering the worst case. So we're going best case on mitigation, worst case on adaptation.
That'd be annoying. Just in relation to the consultation which we're going to do, at the Norwich site, in half-term, in the forum, that's a precursor to the consultation. That's not that's going to inform what the consultation looks like.
In the same way that we consulted on the biodiversity strategy. So what we found to be successful is we make a good start on the document, and you've got to have something to start with. And that document allows you to then consult on any gaps that you might have. So with the biodiversity strategy, we held an event in the halls, and we invited people along, and it's really sort of brainstorming session. It's we listen to what people want, some specifics, the sort of level of urgency, take the temperature of kind of public opinion, and we use that to check that we haven't got any big gaps, or we're not missing anything from what we've already written. And then that draft then goes out for a detailed, that's then published for public consultation. Okay. People can then, at that point, everybody will get to see the draft that's being proposed, and we'll have a consultation based on very specifics at that point.
And so, have you already determined the methodology to which you're going to be asking people in the forum to inform? That hasn't been created.
Only that it will be general.
Only that it's general, so it's a general
It will be
overview.
a general discussion of targets, the areas of activity, things like that.
Will that be in conjunction with informative events? Have you worked, is the science fair then going to be doing events about climate?
They're having a climate specific day.
Okay, so there's a specific day about climate change, and that is in conjunction with it. Okay, so then people will be, okay, no, that's fine. I was just trying to bend it around my head.
Yeah.
Thank you for that thought. We're well on the way.
So in terms of like the demographic of people who go to climate, like the climate fair festival, I wondered if it has been any sort of way, like whether something like a local people's assembly on climate has been considered, and other ways of getting like a really fair picture of all of the people across the city and what their input would be. Like through sortitions, where people are chosen through sortition rather than by being at a specific event.
I'll just come in on this for a second. Paul might want to say a bit more about the science festival bit of it, but just to remember that the corporate plan engagement as well, which we will be coming on to in a second, has been really thorough and has been very open and has therefore got into some detail about all the issues that the city cares about, including this. And we have used professional researchers to make sure that we are catching the right groups of people and making sure that it's as fair and open as it can be. So that will feed into the science festival isn't the only thing. There's this very substantial engagement that we've undertaken over the last month. So with huge numbers of people involved will also feed into it. So likely the sort of science fair won't be completely representative of the city, but we've done our best through other engagement processes to make sure that we've got some of that stuff as well.
Just a final point on that. Although the engagement will be physically taking place at the forum, we will invite by digital means all of the groups that we have in our contacts database to take part in that. It's not just whoever wanders past us. Hey, so there's a few more projects or schemes ongoing, just to update you on quickly. Probably the most significant is the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership's Norfolk Net Zero Communities project, which I don't think we've discussed previously. So the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership, which is all Norfolk local authorities plus Broad Authority UEA sit on one funding from Innovate UK to run a project looking at the non-technical barriers to reaching net zero. There was, I think, about 15 projects nationally awarded funding, so we did quite well to get that. So the project that is proposed was looking at 7 specific communities across Norfolk, one for each local authority, and doing basically a big engagement research piece there, talking to people to understand what the barriers are to them adopting more sustainable behaviours. The project isn't sort of spending any money on infrastructure or supporting people. It is purely an engagement and research project. Each local authority got to choose where their community was, largely on a ward level. We chose Eden for that with a fair bit of consultation. The reason for that was that it is our most affluent ward and that it's our biggest emitter, so I think it makes sense to target the effort there for both of those reasons. As I say, it's non-technical barriers, so it acknowledges the fact that a lot of the time the solutions are out there, but for whatever reason people aren't adopting them. Again, Eden being the most affluent ward sort of lends itself to that, because a lot of the time people might have the money or disposable income to install solar, air source heat pump, whatever, but for whatever reason aren't. So the project is essentially, at least from our perspective, going into those communities and finding out if people do have the money, why aren't they doing these things? Is it planning, knowledge, trust, lack of contractors, etc.? So the outcome of that will be, we hope, a really good, I guess, plan of how we can then change or engage people to blend into the findings. The project's sort of kind of underway, so it began slowly consulting with the sort of key resident groups, the Eton ward members, and are just gradually going to pick it up as we sort of build the trust, I guess, of people. Started with the community groups because we didn't want to feel like we were sort of going over anyone's heads. There's a project manager working for Norfolk Climate Change Partnership who's overseeing it all, so he's doing all the engagement, but it is likely that there'll be a specialist engagement firm coming in probably middle of next year to run all of that for us. And the project as a whole is set to last about 2 years, so there's going to be plenty of activity, learning, events, etc. going on throughout that. I think I've covered most of that. Next one is the Climate Commission's Community Energy Champions project. So, as has been discussed, the Climate Commission has been providing a sort of advisory role to us as we develop various bits, but they've also had a sort of developed spin-off group called Our Power, which is very much looking at community energy retrofit advice, particularly in less affluent areas. They ran a couple of events, I think, early last year, looking at community groups and engaging community groups and their members on this kind of thing. But they're planning a project now to provide or to have a role of energy champions in less affluent areas to promote opportunities to people, find out why. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it's really about having a trusted presence in communities, to kind of similar to the Eton project, but the other end of the spectrum. Promote sustainable behaviour to people, sort of cheap, low-end things that people can do that they don't necessarily know about. The idea is that it kind of starts small with people, just making basic suggestions, but then the idea is to build up trust and eventually sort of move on to potential community energy type projects. Because you look at the kind of map of national community energy schemes in Norfolk at the moment, it's a bit barren. So this kind of, I think, long term wants to build to that, but very much under the pretense that you're not going to go from 0 to 100 straight away. So you want to build the trust of the communities to begin with. So we've given them a bit of funding to kick off the project, and then they're hoping to bid for further external funding from elsewhere. So that's that one. Then the next one, again linked to this, so the Climate Commission's one is very much focused on emissions, retrofit, etc. We've been approached by Groundwork East, who run a Green Doctors scheme. They've run it nationally elsewhere really successfully. And they've got funding potentially to run it in Norwich. It looks likely, but they're just waiting on final confirmations. That is very sort of, for those really struggling from fuel poverty, more away from retrofit energy efficiency, but obviously touches upon it, but very much how people can be supported in paying their energy bills, managing debt, sort of managing health conditions related to staying warm. Obviously, as I say, retrofit is all linked to that, but that's very much more the early level, or late level, crisis support. Like I say, that's not guaranteed, but at the moment it's looking very likely to start next year, and then we'll roll for 3 years after that. So it's quite a significant scheme that, if they get the funding, should be happening. We're currently planning on, once they do get the funding, to work out how we integrate that into all the various other things that are ongoing, so it supports them rather than duplicating. It's probably not the kind of thing that we're going to be able to advertise support, just because it's limited numbers and there's almost infinite demand at the moment. So it'll be very much more signposting. If sort of customer contact identifies someone really struggling, signposting that to them rather than advertising it for everyone. The next thing is the Sustainable Food Norwich Partnership, which has been set up. I don't know if you know much about that. We support it, but it's been very much driven by people at the Institute for Sustainable Development, Goodery, and another organisation I forget, but they've successfully bid for Norwich to be granted a sustainable food place, which is an accreditation that then opens potential for further funding for various schemes and initiatives. They ran an event at Blackfriars Hall 3 weeks ago, which was really well attended. Basically all sort of small community groups, well, small and large groups, to be honest, in the area, working on food security, local growing, organic growing, all sorts of things in that sphere. Yeah, that's really well attended, and I think following from that, those who run the partnership are going to be doing an action plan for Norwich to sort of drive that work forward and integrate all those groups that at the moment are sort of working not on their own, but disparately. So that's a really good bit of progress there, I think, for something that for a while has maybe been not at the top of the agenda, but that is really gathering momentum now. And as I say, we're, I don't know what the right phrase is, key partners, strategic partners, supporter, and so it's been helping a lot with that. And then the last thing is the Solar Together and Switch and Save, which we've been running for a while, continues to run. The Solar Together 2023 auction has just closed and had really strong sign up, so we're hoping that that translates into actual installations. I think the last few years we've seen the need for that, and then the Switch and Save scheme is currently open. That's been really up and down lately because of the energy market, but the current auction is open, so people can sign up for that. It closes on the 9th of January, and as the report says, all the tariffs under that are 100% renewable, so that's a good way of getting people potentially lower bills while getting 100% renewable electricity. That is everything, I think.
Thank you. Any questions on that second half?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll bring Councillor Fox first this time.
Yeah, so reading through the environment strategy, the one that's the 2020 to 2025 one, it says to develop a sustainable food group and apply for sustainable food city status 2023 and then ongoing. With the groundwork green doctors and with Sustainable Food Norwich, are we doing something separate to that? So, like, because it says that the council will develop a sustainable food group, do we have our own sustainable food group and then these partners are kind of an addition to that, or is this a completely separate thing?
It's one of those happy coincidences where a great group of people just came forward at the right time. I'd like to say it was all carefully planned and it happened in exactly the right year as we'd set out in our plan, but basically this group has appeared on our radar. They've set themselves up. They're very credible, and they fit very snugly into our environmental strategy. So we have offered them our support as strategic partners. It's likely at some point that we'll offer them or help them obtain funding. And so yes, they are one and the same group. So there isn't an addition to that. They are the group who we're working with as that strategic partner for sustainable food.
And do we have some sort of measure of what we want to achieve with that, and how is that being monitored, I suppose, or yeah?
I think it's probably important to say that the new citywide climate action strategy and plan will replace the current environmental strategy. It builds upon it. It recognises that it sets down some really important foundations. But as you're alluding to there, it doesn't really have mechanisms for measurement. So one of the requirements of the new strategy is that we do set up a comprehensive measurement framework for everything that we're doing across all of the elements of which food is one. So that's in consideration, and it's something that evolves out of the activity.
Councillor Johnson?
So I guess just with the sustainable food Norwich, with the I'm aware of that. So the event at Blackfriars, how did we identify, or how were groups identified? Were the city's allotments incorporated in that discussion? Just as
I think it was essentially an open invite to any group that wanted to attend, so we weren't involved in the invite list and attendees, but I gather that groups were targeted, but anyone who wanted to be there could be there, as far as I'm aware.
I think you just jump out. We have an outdoor projects network which comprises 70 or 80 individual groups that have interest in growing or managing green spaces in the city. And so that engagement is managed through the community engagement team, community enabling team, I knew I got it wrong. So I'm although I can't speak for that team, I would be 99% certain that they would have invited the outdoor projects or members of the outdoor projects network to that event.
So, I mean, and I'm just trying to, for instance, there was at one time a orchard planted in Slybottom Park, I believe, which to my understanding is now largely neglected, but is under the City Council's, we're looking after it or not looking after it, as the case may be. And obviously, if we want sustainable food networks within the city, we need to be following examples like from Totnes with their admirable tree planting and for nuts and fruit. Are we going to be making pockets of land that we have ownership of accessible to community groups? And are we going to create new green spaces that can be incorporated into and used by community groups to grow food?
I think that's a likely outcome. But there's another exercise that's underway at the moment, which is consultation around parks and open spaces strategy. So we're sort of talking in the middle of these two areas. So there was a consultation event for the parks and open spaces strategy. There was very strong representation of biodiversity and other sort of requirements at that. So there certainly is a discussion going on internally about whether that does promote food production in the council's own parks and open spaces.
Now, just formally ask that in future myself and Councillor Fox are invited to such events, because we only were made aware of the event after it had occurred, and I would very much like to have been in the room, if that makes sense. And I'm sure that it was an oversight, but to be fully informed and to fulfil our function here, it's very useful to be incorporated and participatory in events which lead up and inform, if that makes sense, just for future reference. Thank you.
I was just going to briefly add, noted that. I was just going to briefly add that even aside from the work that's just been mentioned around sustainable food, the community enabling team do an awful lot of work in terms of enabling community groups to take over pieces of our land and to use it for either for food or for other issues. So that's very much a kind of key part of what that team do already.
I just wanted to add to that my team has found £2,500 as an example of how we do actively engage stage, we have a seed fund, which is literally seeds. It's not seed capital, but it's growing seeds to enable community groups to plant and grow their own food. So yeah, we're pretty active in that. We'll take your point about inviting you.
Thank you. That's fine. Just on the seed front, does that mean that we're developing a seed bank in Norwich? And are those seeds, are they like heritage variety, or are they, I know that's a bit being pedantic, but in a agro-biodiversity context, and with the changing environment from climate change, are we collecting and distributing seeds that have got enough genetic biodiversity to withstand changes to the wider environment?
So two things here. Parks and open spaces, climate resilience, yes, where there's planting that is taking place that will exist over a number of years. I suspect that for the seeds for community groups, outdoor projects network, are, I suspect, straight out of a pretty common or garden seed catalogue. But I take your point that that's something that we should be considering.
Brilliant. And just as a final point, and I know I'm being, sorry, with the trees, are we also planting adaptively for changing conditions? So are we taking into account that we're going to have, as was stated earlier, a very likely outcome of 2.9 degrees increase? And with that in mind, are we planting or are we considering planting trees that would be more resilient to that? Is that
The answer to that is yes.
okay?
A tree strategy has been drafted, it's been circulated for several months. It very much incorporates adaptive planting.
Thank you. I'll do my homework and read that. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Fox.
Yeah, just there's at the start of the policy framework, there's just some definitions that I wanted to be really clear that I know what they mean really. So where it says that Norwich is a sustainable and healthy city, I wonder what the definition of sustainable is and healthy in terms of that statement, but also where it says within aim 2, the corporate plan establishes the following priority: reduce carbon emissions, protect the environment. And I just wondered sort of how that balance is made with planning policy, because, for example, somewhere like there's where the Rose Lane Community Garden was, at the moment, there is a pocket of really amazing wildlife habitat there. It's one of the parts of sort of the area where I live, where I walk past and hear lots of birdsong. But that is obviously earmarked for development. So where it says sort of protect the environment, what counts as the environment?
So I think inevitably you end up with very generalised statements in a corporate plan. The place to look for the definitions is in the adopted strategies of the council, where there's inherently more detail. So, for example, in the biodiversity strategy, we very explicitly set out a policy which is to increase species abundance and diversity. So, not just, there's no wiggle room in that. It's to increase both in the city. And yes, there are, the problem that we face as a global community is the problem of providing housing, sufficient quality housing for the ever-increasing population, and also squaring the circle of protecting and enhancing. What you'll see us moving away from is protecting the environment. It's no longer sufficient to stop doing bad. We have to do good at the same time. And so managing those conflicts is what is what the next decade is all about in other ways. So with regards to biodiversity, and back to the specifics of your piece of land, we've undertaken a year-long piece of work to map biodiversity in the city and to understand where that exists, and that will inform the detail of the biodiversity activity plan, which is how do we deliver on that policy of increasing abundance and diversity.
feels like we're sort of almost moving on to the next item on the corporate plan and priorities. So are we happy to do that and conclude that topic? So thank you very much. It's a really good set of updates and projects ongoing, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in the future. But next item is the corporate plan consultation with members on the climate and environment aspects of the plan. I'm sure we've all had some sort of level of engagement with this already, but shall I hand over then?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just do a brief introduction. First of all, to introduce Will and Catherine, who are from Inner Circle, who are helping us to develop the corporate plan, and jointly with Collaborate, who have done all the engagement work on this. So they will be leading the session on this. We might need to fiddle around with it given the limited numbers, so guys, do what you think needs doing. But just to sort of set the context, obviously, as you all know, we are creating a new corporate plan to start from next year to 2029. We've done a huge amount of engagement across the city, and including with all, given the opportunity for all members to put into that engagement process as well. Both through some meetings that we had, but also through an opportunity to kind of feed back through more thoroughly after those meetings that we had late October, early November, those were. So kind of conscious that that's already happened and members have already been engaged on that, but given the sort of specific remit of this committee, it felt necessary to also take your views on it as well. So we are going to take you through a few specific sort of areas and get your views on those. That will all then flow through, obviously, into the whole kind of engagement pack that we are gathering together from all the engagement that we've already done across the city and with stakeholders and partners and so on. And then we'll flow that all through into a new corporate plan, which will start to sort of come through the processes. Its first viewing will be at scrutiny in January. So that's the plan. I'll hand over to Will and Catherine. As I say, we might need to just see how we go in terms of ability to answer all the things we've got on there.
Excellent, thanks Helen. Nice to meet everyone this afternoon. It's evening now, I suppose the sun's gone down. So thanks for the introduction. I think one of the first things that we're hoping to chat through with you is really how to make sure that the corporate plan is, and especially the environmental aspects of it, we're able to breathe life into it. So not just words on a page, but something that every staff member at the council is actually able to see themselves and their role in. So it would be great to hear your perspectives. And we've read through the feedback that you provided on the corporate plan. So in addition to the written feedback and the consultation, just if there are suggestions or recommendations that you have around how to make everyone in the council really centered around environmental priorities. So it's one thing if it's part of your daily portfolio, as we've heard from colleagues, there's a lot on their plates, and it sounds like lots of work to come, but it's also for those colleagues who aren't necessarily in an environmental-centric role, but could still consider the environment in their everyday work, and your thoughts around those approaches.
Yeah.
You're passing again,
I guess, well, I mean, straight off the bat, you're talking about cultural change, aren't you? You're talking about systematic cultural change throughout the council. And it does feel like often the environment is a bolt-on to, it feels like, when I was in school and as a teacher in an institution, when more things are brought on, it feels like more is being put on your plate that you've got to deal with. And so there's a resentment. And what I would really like to see is, how do we celebrate, how do we celebrate those changes within the council? How do people feel like it benefits them? So, I mean, like in City Hall right now, today, I've already had conversations about how it's so hot that people have had to open windows.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, and it creates cognitive dissonance. It creates cognitive, if that's the right terminology, where you're working in an environment where on paper it all looks lovely, and then your lived experience of that reality sort of kind of rubs up against it, and it creates this feeling that it feels tokenistic. you know, you're doing something good, you're saving electricity by turning off these lights, or you're doing whatever, or the account, you know, there's investment in a thing, but then your lived experience sort of rubs up against that. And I think it's really important that if you want to create effective change culturally throughout an institution, what you've really got to do is you've got to create the lived experience that people feel like they benefit from this, that it's part of their, you know, part of their experience. And I don't know how you manifest that, but I don't know if that even makes sense. It makes sense in my head when I say it. But I feel like it to, you know, to sort of, so that when, you know, it's an institutional change. Am I making any sense? I'm being a lunatic.
It makes sense to me, but that doesn't really.
Yeah, we might just hang out too much together. So that would be my first point on that. Trying to dive in. Any thoughts?
You sound like you're on the roll.
Well, I could keep going for a long time.
Come back in afterwards. I think I grew up in rural Norfolk, and when you're immersed in nature, it's an important thing for you, and you notice changes. You notice changes in sort of biomarkers that hint at things like climate change, and you kind of notice them ahead of time. And not everybody has the luck to grow up in that sort of environment. But if you surround people by all of the signs of that, so maybe there could be pictures on walls of these things that that might make people attach to outcomes, so through imagery. Exactly that, but that's in one room that we come into for council meetings, whereas if, you know, people's offices are covered in beautiful environmental things, then they have that image there every day, and it starts to hint towards that's a possibility. I think it's like messages in the environment you're working in, and pictures of those messages too, so that it's just not some dry old words. And also, perhaps, you know, for, you know, in staff turnover, when new members of staff are coming in to work here, perhaps it could be part of the interview process that, you know, this is seen as an important thing, and, you know, part of the expectation of you fulfilling your role is going to be that this is something that you show some interest in, and I don't know, maybe team building exercises out in nature. I do not know, but there's some suggestions, I guess. Good.
And that 5 years, you know, I'd be interested to know, because it's that thing of having tangible outcomes, if that makes sense. And are there tangible outcomes that people will be able to see, so that you can, so on the roof of the building, what have we got on the roof of the building? What that heat exchange? Air source heat pump on them. But I wonder how many people are aware of that, if that makes sense, because we've designed it in such a way that you can't see it, so that it's hidden, which is on one level good, but on another level it sort of means that, you know, are people aware, and, you know, and so to allow people to be aware of what progress has been made, so they can feel proud of the institution, you know, so they can look at Norwich, because if you feel like you're part of something which is changing and developing, then, you know, that gives you a sense of civic pride, of engagement, and to allow people to be informed and to see the changes around them, so that they're, you know, so we're building a community. One of the things I've noticed very much since I've become a councillor is how siloed the different departments within the council are. And I get the distinct impression that you've got different cultures within different areas of the council, which seem to have their own, and I suspect it's completely, you know, incidental, but it appears from my you know, interactions, you've got different priorities which which seem to emerge. And so you've got some areas of the council which really seem to do, you know, when I speak to them, they're really enthusiastic, and some areas which you can almost feel the eyes rolling when you're writing the email and you're getting the response, you know, it's like, oh no, not him again. And so it's sort of like, it would be interesting, you know, can we bring everyone with us on that journey, which is pretty much what I said before, but to give them that sort of visual. And when you know, sort of, when you walk up to City Hall in front, you've got all the plants, just as an example, you know, what are the plants, what are planted there? You know, for me, that would be an ideal opportunity where you could have an array of biodiversity, you know, with explanation of what's happening there, right in front of City Hall, which would really highlight, you know, how so many people are, you know, walk past. But if it's just another flower bed which is, you know, it almost does not even worth comment. But could we do something which is, you know, worth comment, if that makes sense, sort of to cause people when they see it to go, oh, that's the thing, you know, you know, oh, have we got within, you know, I don't know, we could be doing things like beehives on the roof, you know, are there innovative things that we could be doing within the building and within our buildings, which would be a conversation starter, which, you know, isn't just, you know, because a lot of stuff is dull, you know what I mean? It's like you can only discuss heat source pumps for so long before everyone in the party's walked off, you know what I mean? And so are there ways that we can create engagement through interesting and innovative use of, to sort of highlight what we're trying to do in a broader sense, you know, in relation to biodiversity, in relation to the climate, so people feel engaged and also listened to, so that if they've got things which they want to be feeding in, you know, do they feel listened to individually? Again, I mean, that's all very broad. I don't know if that, but I feel that's what the corporate plan is, isn't it? Broad. So that's some broad thoughts on the matter.
Everybody goes to the loo, and I quite often will read the things on the back loo doors. So that's like a place where you kind of get everyone. So if messages could be on the inside doors of toilets that maybe help people to think about, I don't know, some of this stuff a bit more and maybe really creatively in ways that might excite them, then I think the toilet is a place that you can do that.
There's a reason why marketing has latched on to that as a tool, because it works. I think that's really helpful feedback, especially around culture change, because it is such a complex task to really shape a culture, to grow a culture. So there's one aspect of doing that internally at the council, and making sure that environment is a focus internally, and that it threads throughout everything that people do and the way that they work. I think another step forward from that would be engaging with the public on it, with the work that the council is doing. I heard some comments around it a little bit about maybe a need to showcase some of the successes to date, but do you have some thoughts around how the council could engage with the public moving forward, or specifically around the environment or the ways of working at the council?
Yeah. One thing which springs to mind is recently we had an Eco4 retrofit scheme, and I was using it as an example. And what I found is my experience, that was that when people engaged with that, they didn't really know, the people who did it were the people who were already quite keen to being, you know, it didn't reach a new audience, I don't feel. And I think often what the council does, like for instance, when we're reaching out to community groups, and go, well, with, you know, this community group, it says as somebody who's trying to start community groups, I sometimes feel that until you've done the, you know, the incentivization of people to engage collectively and with the council sometimes feels a little bit lacking. And it's a very difficult thing to sort of pinpoint how. But if you know, it's about how do we, for instance, schools, you know what I mean? I sometimes feel like we miss a beat. So, for instance, we've just heard earlier that we're going to have a science fair event at half term. And to me, when I hear that, I would have reached out to every school, but 6 months in advance, and I would have said, you know, which obviously you didn't know this was happening 6 months, but if you were to reach out to schools, so that, because I did a bit of time in, I've done a time in schools, and one of the things which happens is by engaging with schools, you then multiply that, because those kids go home and they speak to their parents, and then that reaches out into the community, and it can be a very effective method. And so I would suggest, you know, when we're trying to reach out to groups, I feel like there's certain groups which seem to have not preferential, maybe that's not the right word, but they maybe engage or respond better to the council, and so they get repeated engagements. And then there's other groups which maybe don't engage so well, and so then they sort of get, you know, they sort of end up falling off the radar. And so what I would be interested in doing is trying to find out how we can, you know, are we engaging with schools, with colleges, with the university effectively in a meaningful way, that then, you know, could those institutions help multiply what we're trying to do and reflect what we're trying to do, inform what we're trying to do, so that we're high. And the problem is also it's that division, isn't it? So I'm talking about education here, and that falls under the county remit. But those are citizens, you know, although they're not voting age, all those kids in that school, they're all part, you know, they're all in our wards. We've got sort of responsibility to them. So I feel like by using mechanisms like that, we could have far wider outreach, if that follows. Just off, you know. Again, I start ranting, and then I feel like I'm just making it sound like a lunatic.
Yeah, following on from that, I think you're right, there's a balance between everyone has to have the opportunity to have their say, and that's often going to attract people who are typically more engaged and see our comms and pay attention. And then Helen talked earlier about some of the efforts in this process that we've gone through to try and get people who are a bit harder to reach or wouldn't naturally put themselves forward, using existing community groups, schools, etc. I think is important in the kind of climate context of the Climate Commission. There are young commissioners school age who've gone forth and taken a survey out to their schools and done engagement on that level. I know we have invited school groups, or I think sent quite an open invite to kind of come here, see the mural, learn a bit about what's going on. It's definitely an avenue to sort of consider and explore further if we can. And obviously they do engage at the Science Festival. It may well be on the sort of distribution that we've already talked about, kind of practically inviting people, not just seeing who turns up and comes along. But yeah, I think it's all a good point.
Can I just add one point to that? I think
It's really important that I used to be the teacher who would be given everything environmental sense of that school. You know what I mean? Like everything. It would be, you know, it would be like, and it wasn't us being paid extra. It wasn't that it was, you know, it was something which was self-appointed. And I think that will be the case throughout, not just schools, but I would say institutionally, most institutions have got a few people in it who really give a damn, and they often are the people who get all that additional stuff. And what I'd really like to see is how can we support those individuals so they're not just getting additional workload.
Ironically, we call them champions. You took it so seriously that you obviously changed your names.
I think one of the things that gets people engaged is if they see that their views are having an effect. So I agree with engaging young people, but like I think with something like a citizens' assembly, a youth citizens' assembly, where young people come together, where they're given information, like information from experts, and then they're challenged with making a decision, and then they get to present that decision at council and see what the response to that is. So they actually get engaged in what goes on in this building. So for me, it's all about sort of, people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, and doing youth assemblies as well. But then people seeing their views being put into practice.
I think that's one of our hopes for this corporate plan, is that everyone reading it will see themselves and their role in it. So I think maybe Helen can speak to this further as well. I think in terms of the approach, so because there was so much consultation that went into this, the themes that emerge will be what has come through from community and what has resonated the most and the loudest, I would say. So hopefully people see themselves in their role and see their voices reflected on the page, and then it will be up to not just the council, but those that partner with the council, community members, to work sort of in tandem to make those come to life.
Just to add to that, that we're really clear about the need to sort of feed back to the people who have engaged in the corporate plan process. In some cases, that's pretty tricky because we will literally kind of stand, not me, but our expert colleagues were literally sort of standing outside schools and outside, shopping centres and whatever to catch people, so we don't know all the details of those people to be able to sort of specifically feed back on how we've caught the information that they've shared with us and how we've responded to it. But certainly we're working up plans for how we can get that stuff back out to the city to say, this is what we heard and this is what we're doing with it. But more generally as well, just doing some work in Max's team, in the community enabling team, to get better at making sure we feed back on the response to consultations and other engagement exercises, and make it more of a sort of, partly to our Get Talking Norwich platform, we can make it more of a sort of two-way conversation and engagement, rather than it feeling like the council asking you stuff and it going into a black hole. But also just in general, kind of our overall consultation and engagement approach, to make sure that it's much more two-way feedback and clear about what we've done with the information that we've received. So that would certainly apply on this kind of stuff too.
Just one other thing, so like if the part of the public consultation, if like some of those conversations are videoed, so that then people can see that citizens are actually, having a conversation. So I know when the National Climate Assembly was done, there was a video made where you could hear some of the people like saying why they've made decisions, hearing how they've come to particular points, and sometimes perhaps showing those conversations in that way might reach out to other people too.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's really helpful. And again, it's really helpful to hear some of these. So we're coming towards the end of the engagement now, but it's really helpful to hear these comments that are coming through and reinforcing some of the things and bringing in some new ideas. We've talked a bit there about some partners and engagements with community groups as well as individuals. And that leads on to a question about, are there any things that would need to be done in terms of working with partners that is underway already, things we want to build on, things we maybe want to reinvigorate, or things we need to do that are new in terms of the partnerships and getting everyone working together on these issues?
My instinct on it is that I think what you've got often with community groups or with any organisation is they go through waves of engagement. So you will often have somebody with some time or some energy during lockdown. What in my local area, it doesn't anecdotally, in my local area during lockdown, we had a mushrooming of community engagement, because suddenly people they were out visiting, and it then created a movement, and that created a community group who then realised they had collective interests and then pushed for those. And was the easy wins. It was the dragging the furniture out of the undergrowth, and the sort of like, when I say easy wins, it's hard bloody work, but actually it was really visible. But when you got to the more sort of nuanced, what are we going to do next bit? And are we going to plant some seeds, or are we going to create? It then sort of leveled off. It felt like people wanted, if I did a call out for people to come and help me drag mattresses out of the undergrowth, I'd have all these buddy men come along, and it would be like, oh yeah, it would be all great, and we'd do loads of work. But then when you're sort of like, oh well, we're going to be scattering seeds today, I suddenly found that I sort of wasn't getting that same uptake. And I feel like this often is the way with community groups, that they have like ebbs and flows, and to assist those groups, I don't know if I'm veering off from your question, but to assist those groups, to sustain them, because often what is really sad is often you might have, I don't know if you've experienced that, where you have community groups or community gardens that they're doing really well, and then a few key players get a different job or move, and then it sort of falls away, and often it just feels like they haven't got that sort of mechanism to continue. And what I would really like to see is support, because often you can see that kind of happening when you're close to the ground. And I don't know how you would do that really, but if we want to create meaningful change across the city, and a lot of our work is based, we've externalized a lot of what we do as a council, as a country, in a neoliberal hellscape that we live in. And we rely now on the volunteers out there, often, or community groups who are getting small funding grants. And often their small funding grants are very knee-jerk. They've got suddenly have a few weeks or something suddenly to apply for some funds, and they've got to shoehorn their objectives into that. And I sometimes feel like we have, to make sure that we're assisting those groups so that they're able to be part of that wider vision. I think sometimes council's capable of that as well, where we sometimes will see a grant and we'll go for that grant, and then we will figure out why we've gone for that grant, almost as we're doing it. You're like, oh, there's a pot of money, that would be great. And so there was a pot of money a couple of years ago and that created the community, what were they? The community, the shoe box.
Connectors?
The community connectors were born out of that. But a lot of the groups that we got hold of during that scenario, for instance, I'll use Heathgate as an example. There was somebody who almost, they were keen to improve the natural environment within Heathgate. They applied for funding, they managed to pull together the community, and it was fantastic and it was well intentioned, but none of those same areas have been vandalized. That money hasn't achieved any of the outcomes it intended to, because it wasn't part of a broader strategy, and it wasn't something that the council was really watching in a more sort of comprehensive sense. And that, I feel it's almost unfair to use that as an example, because, bless them, they work bloody hard to create. But it's sort of like, how do we address that? And that's something I would really be interested in seeing. How can we bring people on board? Because often you have very small groups of people trying to achieve a great deal. And, how do we support those individuals to, fulfill the potential which we're asking of them, especially considering a lot of things they're doing, we're incorporating into our, we're sort of like, look at what we're doing as a council, and we're not necessarily doing the work, if that makes, again, any sense.
Councillor Fox, what the original question, was it partners, anything to add on that kind of thing, or it doesn't matter if not? It's a very broad topic. From my perspective, I think it's something that few years I've been involved, it's been getting there. It's been much strengthened in a climate forum, at least now, obviously, as we've already touched on today, the Climate Commission and the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership back up as well, on top of all the 2040 Vision Partnership work and some other sort of relationships with anchor institutions sort of outside of that as well, which there's still room to add and strengthen, and especially maybe in some areas like we've already committed to do, like retrofit task force, that kind of pathway and way of sort of coordinating, strengthening that really. But yeah, and then you picked up a lot of points about that kind of maybe more community level partnership working, which can't be forgotten either.
Was there anything else?
I just wanted to come in on the temperature in the building, but it's probably after you finish your consultation. Yes, it's been warm in the building. I just wanted to reply to that. The reason is that we've been running on the air source heat pump until the weather got very cold, and in the coldest weather we revert to a gas boiler. The controls between those is not good, is clunky. But we've had a meeting with our property services team actually today, and the existing budget from the air source heat pump and the budget that they have has been brought together, about £70,000 or £80,000. And we've appointed a controls partner, building management systems, BMS, pretty complicated techie stuff. So we're about to embark on a controls improvement for not only this building, but it will also bring we've got about 2,000 residents on community heating schemes. So it will bring those schemes all onto a kind of central digital platform that gives us better control. So we're on it. But basically what happens is the building takes 3 days to warm up or cool down. And the solution is something called predictive controls, where you're controlling your building to the anticipated weather in 3 or 4 days' time. It sounds simple, but it's quite tricky to implement. So that's the solution that's being looked at the moment. But yeah, we recognise it. Having windows open, is in the winter is always a sign of poor control, and so we're on that at the moment. It will take a few months to sort out.
So thank you for your comments on the partnership weather and the explanation on the heating of the building, which has definitely been felt differently today than I think the last time we were up last week. So we have noticed a difference in that. It's good to have an explanation for it. Finally, and it's the last question to prompt at the moment, and it is a question I think has been touched on when we've been discussing some of the items in the first agenda item today. It's points on financing. One of the things within the corporate plan is being aware that, of course, we're all working within limited resources, us and partners across Norwich and the country, of course, and understanding that, as well as things that Norwich County Council, City Council can do itself, there is also a role for bringing the wider partnership together to make the most of some of those opportunities and achieving funding. I think Councillor Champion, you touched on some of that already in terms of looking ahead to some of those and doing it in a more strategic way. Is there anything else you'd like to flag about potential ways to access some of the financing for this, either as the City Council or working in partnership with others?
Well, sorry, it's difficult to predict, isn't it? Because I always find it quite bizarre how funding seems to just sort of pop into, like somebody in Westminster has an idea and goes, let's bung some money at that and then see who jumps. And I can appreciate that it's a very reactive, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we're in a state where, in order to achieve a lot of the outcomes that we want to get to, we have to sort of then apply for funding and then shoehorn what we're doing, what we want to be doing, around what they would like you to be doing, so that they both look like they're the same. I think for me, a really important part of that is having which I appreciate is part of that corporate plan, but by a really accessible, realistic vision, which is, what you're that is succinct and accessible for people, and so that community groups are able to sort of, when they're engaging, that they can see where that fits in. So it's part, it's part of that sort of broader platform, and I appreciate that's all these roads you're trying to get to this, they're all like in alignment, aren't they, in a lot of ways, but to make it, often it feels like that, you have to be quite technocratic and bureaucratic in order to, even engage with half the application processes. And, how do you address that is quite complicated, but to have a broader, so that if the city had a very, our 2040 statement and that idea of being, zero carbon, all those sort of things, if they're, really, really clear so people can see when they're, that they're part of that, I feel that would be, in my mind, really important. I mean, if that doesn't really answer the question, but reiterates my previous point, maybe.
That's fair. So that's more about how Norwich City Council takes on funding bids and makes it easier for groups to apply for that. And yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure I clarified that.
Yeah.
Any others, Councillor Hampson or Councillor Fox?
Councillor Fox, do you want to?
No, I totally agree with that. There's a community group that I'm involved with, and the purpose of it is to sort of increase biodiversity in the neighbourhood we live in. Applying for funding so difficult that we pretty much just didn't and stopped and gave up and have just been funding it ourselves, which means that you can only do a tiny amount of what you would do if it was much more straightforward. So I think making it really, really straightforward for community groups to access, funding bids aren't always easy, are they? So I think we're missing out on a lot of potential of what people would do in the city because there is that barrier of bureaucracy there.
Yeah, and I suppose we do want to do the things you mentioned, obviously working with partners and levering whatever we can from other sources, and also having that state readiness to be able to apply for these things whenever they roll along, which I know is in itself has resource implications. And then there's the onus on us to get the priorities right within the resource that we do have, which is part of the reason why this corporate plan exercise, etc., is important. And in a climate context, I think obviously that means we already are putting more weight on the things, but obviously we've made it as a principle that at the very least can't exacerbate other issues people are facing, fuel poverty, but those things that bring the benefits, bring them up to the forefront, which I hope from the discussions we've had so far, especially in other forums, is going to be picked up in this piece of work. And again, we've talked about kind of the sort of other potentially more innovative sources of finance we might be able to pursue, and are kind of, looking at progressing with green finance bonds, that sort of thing. And so just sort of leaving no stone unturned, I suppose, is what we've got to do at the moment when, as we've said, all the limitations to just having to fit into what's coming along and then not always being successful anyway, although obviously I think we've done a fairly good job overall in making the most of those opportunities. But yeah.
Just sort of in terms of kind of public engagement, I guess. I'm really lucky where I live. We've got like a really strong neighbourhood group that came out of the energy of a lot of energy of a few people, and has been and has been maintained by a few people putting in a lot of energy. But they're like across the rest of the ward, I don't see those same neighbourhood groups. And I think if energy was put into creating those neighbourhood groups and maintaining them, then that could be a really good way to sort of engage the public, because then you have, I know that I can contact that group through social media, and immediately the vast majority of the people who live in my neighbourhood will be engaged. I'm not describing this very well, but it takes energy to set up, and people don't come to a meeting, people come to a party. So I think one of the things that our neighbourhood group has done really well is they, sort of probably 3 or 4 times through the year, there'll be, I don't know, a barbecue, there'll be a party, there'll be a street party, there'll be a Christmas party. And that brings the community together, and that's then where you can have a conversation about, how do we feel about sort of, the environment around us, or how do we feel about this issue around us? But it doesn't happen out of a meeting, it happens out of our parties.
Can I make one more point? The demographics of Norwich are, I mean, this is me being old when I say this, are quite young. So the majority of, I believe, in the 5-year, if you look at the population pyramid, the bulge is what, 25 to 30, yeah. And then below that it's 20 to 25. Am I correct in saying that? And I just wonder if our community engagement reaches our largest demographic very effectively. And I would be very curious when we're talking about the corporate plan, if there are different demographics, who is responding, who is responding to our call out for this, and how do we, in North Norwich, people don't report things to the police, and so the police will then go through Facebook feeds and local community groups to identify where there is crime occurring, which sounds insane, but it's it's effective. And if I want to engage with people, if I put something on Facebook, but again, that isn't a mechanism which will engage with the largest proportion of our population, because demographically they aren't using that as a mechanism. And in fact, a lot of younger people are now using anonymized social networks, which don't record who they are or what they're doing, because they're wiser than we are. And I guess what I'd be very curious, and I know this is an outcome scenario, but I'd be very curious once you've done, once this is concluded, and the deadline is quite soon for this. When is the deadline, sorry?
For the engagement?
Yeah.
So the official engagement is already finished.
Oh, it's already done and dusted. So, when we're picking apart the data, it would be very interesting to see who we've engaged with, what demographics, that is, because my instinct is that you probably have quite a broad engagement from people, this is me just being, weird, but I would imagine between 40 and 65, I don't know, that would be my guess. But I bet our largest demographic is the least represented, and what I'll be very curious about is how we can, how can we address that in a meaningful way. Get Norwich Talking is fantastic on some levels, but is it the be-all and end-all, and are there other ways of drawing in commentary from younger people, especially on issues like climate change, because they're going to be the most affected? If that sounds like a reasonable comment, I don't know, but there you go.
Just to say, we do have a few mechanisms in place, standing mechanisms. So we've sort of worked hard to create a youth group under the City Vision. It's just a City Vision younger people version. The City Vision itself was informed by specific engagement with younger people after we had a conference at Norwich City Football Club and realised that we were all, as older and of a similar age perhaps, and we better go and talk to some young people, because if we're aiming for 2045, then half of us will be dead. So we specifically did that for the 2040 vision. We've used some of that engagement process to inform this vision, to inform this corporate plan stuff. And as I say, we do have kind of 4 bodies in place where we try and do that in relationships with organisations that have a relationship, have really good quality relationships with young people. It's tricky because they often don't want to engage particularly, and there's a bit of kind of consultation fatigue there as well. But we have proactively tried to make sure we get access to that demographic, certainly.
Is there a way that like those views are weighted? So that the views of that great bigger demographic can be weighted more than
I think we'll have to take advice from the researchers who are experts in terms of how you make sure that that what they are reflecting back to us is a fair reflection of the society that they're looking at. So we take advice from them, but we'll certainly have the feedback that we get from them will certainly give us that detail where we can get it. Say in some cases where we sort of pulled someone off the street to talk to them, we won't necessarily, we'll have a guess, but we won't necessarily know exactly the demographic. But we would take advice from them on how to weight that properly to give a fair sample.
Before I turn it back over to Helen, is there any question that we didn't ask that you wish we had?
There's one point.
I'm just curious if we've had specific engagement with underrepresented communities or communities that may be, so for instance, EAL, English as an additional language communities, Norwich's refugee community. Have we specifically reached out to those groups? We have?
Yes, we've used the community enabling team's expertise and then connections that they have with particular groups to make sure that we are attempting to speak to people from underrepresented groups. We've also done some work to make sure that the surveys that we've done are available in different languages and so on. I haven't got all the detail yet about how successful we've been in that, but we've certainly tried to make sure that we're reaching out to them.
So just to say as well, that we, as part of that, had individual interviews with a number of representatives of partner organisations, and that does include partners who represent some of those groups as well, to be able to feed some of that back in from the views of their members and people they speak to.
I was just going to say thank you for on both counts, on both the items we've had today. I mean, it's fantastic to know that you've been doing all this work, and we genuinely appreciate it. And thank you for listening to our ramblings. And hopefully that's informative and helpful, as opposed to just, eye rolling stuff. So thank you very much, all.
Not at all, and thank you for taking the time. Just to round up then, so as I say, we're gathering all the data that we've got and are starting to produce some sort of high-level versions of the corporate plan. It will be a high-level document. We purposely, to your point really, Councillor Champion, we want to make it something that is, as far as a local government document can be, genuinely engaging and creates a vision that people are happy to buy into. So it's not going to be super detailed. It is very much kind of, this is the ambition we're aiming for. Underneath that, therefore, will be a much fuller plan, a business planning process that we will undertake within the organisation to work out if those are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, what are the steps we need to take to do that, and we'll take a longer time to do that piece of work to make sure that we really get that right and that we're taking forward the right activity given the resources that we have to deliver what we said within that plan. So the corporate plan itself, draft of that will come to scrutiny in January, and then through the normal sort of processes through February Cabinet and Council, and then the business planning process will sort of start in earnest. And so some of the information that we've gathered from this session and from all the other engagement sessions we've had, some of the detailed stuff will end up more in the sort of business planning process and in the corporate plan itself. So don't be surprised if you don't see all of that in there. But it's just to give you a sort of overview of what the next few months will look like on this project.
Thank you, Will and Catherine. And thank you for your contributions. I think it's good that we got a sort of extra opportunity to look at this from a sort of seat perspective. But I believe that's the end of the agenda. So thank you very much for your time, and See you next time.